we don't talk much, we just ball and play, but then we move like tigers on Vaseline. Well, the beer comes up better on a stolen guitar. You're the blessed with the spiders from Mars. But come on, you really got a good thing going. But come on, if you think we're gonna make it, you better hang on to yourself. Come on. Oh.
In 1972, David Bowie finally began to find the universal acclaim he'd been seeking so long with the introduction of his extravagant, wildly theatrical alter ego, Ziggy Stardust.
Now we start hitting real problems because I enjoyed the character so much, and it was so much easier for me to live within that character that, along with the help of some chemical substances at the time, it became easier and easier for me to blur the lines between reality and the blessed creature that I created, my doppelganger. I wasn't getting rid of him at all. In fact, I was joining forces with him. The doppelganger and myself were starting to become one and the same person. And then you start on this trail of chaotic psychological destruction, you know, and you become what's called a drug casualty at the end of it all.
Well, not just yet. In September 1972, as British fans were taking Bowie to their hearts, he and the Spiders from Mars took the Ziggy Stardust show to America. And no sooner had they hit the road than his next creation began to rear its head, the album Aladdin Sane.
I think Aladdin was more in the area of Ziggy Goes to America. I think that was really the I kind of knew that I'd said all I could say about Ziggy, and what I'd end up doing would be Ziggy Part 2 if I started, you know. I thought, well, you know, I'm very tempted to go further with this Ziggy thing only because it's so popular, but actually it's not what I really want to do. So I was kind of really being drawn two ways into, well, shall I go for the obvious commercial thing and do like the next stage of Ziggy, or how do I cut this? What do I do now? And then I've created this bloody thing. How do I sort of get out of it? And sort of as an interim measure, I did this like Ziggy Goes to America. You know, I thought that, well, let's do that for the moment, you know, and that it was almost a treading water album. But funnily enough, in retrospect, for me, it's the more successful album because I think it says it's more informed about rock and roll than Ziggy was.
Small Jean Genie snuck off to the city, strung out on lasers and slashback blazers, and ate all your razors while pulling the waiters, talking about Monroe and walking on Snow White. New York's a go-go and everything tastes nice. Poor little greenie. Ooh. Get back on it. Jean Genie lives on his back. Jean Genie loves chimney stacks. His outrageous, he screams and he balls. But Jean Genie, let yourself go. Sits like a man, but he smiles like a reptile. She love him, but just for a short while. She'll scratch in the sand, won't let go of his hand. He says he's a beautician, sells you nutrition, keeps all your dead hair for making up underwear. Poor little greenie. Ooh. Jean Genie lives on his back. The Jean Genie loves chimney stacks. His outrageous, he screams and he bawls. But Jean Genie, let yourself go.
I think for any English band that goes to America, for the first time, they probably write some of their best stuff. But I don't know how much of a culture shock it is now. I'd like to know, actually. It'd be really interesting how much of a culture shock it is to a young person now to go to America from England for the first time. But I think for us back then, going to America was it. I mean, it just used to blow us away. It was a real, because it was our language, but it was this other world, you know. And for me, of course, wanting this other world, I mean, I just fell into it completely. It was this alternative world that I'd been talking about, and it had all the violence and all the strangeness and the bizarreness, and it was really happening. It was like real life. It wasn't just in my songs. Suddenly, my songs didn't seem as out of place. And all the situations that we were going through were duly noted down, you know, and remarks that I'd heard and real Americanisms that caught my ear, you know, and just the look of some places like Detroit really caught my imagination because it was such a rough city. And it almost looked like the kind of place that I was writing about. I thought, Christ, these places really exist and people live in them. You know, it was, you know, I thought, well, I wonder if Kubrick's seen this town. It makes his kind of world for Clockwork Orange look kind of pansy, you know.
He looked a lot like Che Guevara, drove a diesel van, kept his gun in quiet seclusion, such a humble man, the only survivor of the National People's Gang. Panic in Detroit, asked for an autograph, wanted to stay home, I wish someone would phone. Panic in Detroit. He laughed at accidental sirens that broke the evening gloom. The police had warned of repercussions. It followed none too soon. A trickle of strangers were all that were left alive. Panic in Detroit. I asked for an autograph. He wanted to stay home. I wish someone would phone. Panic in Detroit. Panic in Detroit. Panic in Detroit.
From the Aladdin Sane album, Panic in Detroit, inspired by the overwhelming impact of that city and a chance encounter with, as the song says, a man who looked a lot like Che Guevara.
I know who I associated with that character. It was somebody I used to go to school with who ended up as a very big drugs dealer down in South America and flew in to see one of the shows and reintroduced himself. And I said, I'm not going to mention his name. He said, I don't believe it. Is that what you are now? I mean, he was the full bit, you know, with the clothes and the piece and everything. And I thought, my God, him?
Whereas Bowie had used pickup keyboard players on his British gigs, he and guitarist Mick Ronson decided to bring in a fourth full-time Spider for the American tour. And on the recommendation of an engineer at the RCA studio in New York, they contacted avant-garde jazz pianist Mike Garson.
They actually called me in my house in Brooklyn that night. I was given a piano lesson, and I left the piano student to babysit my daughter, and I went down to RCA, and the Spiders, Mick and Woody and Trevor, they were there. And Mick Ronson said, play this tune down, and he gave me the chords for Changes from the Hunky Dory album. And I sort of just looked at it and I went... And they said, you got the gig. And I said, that is a fast audition. And 2 days later, we're playing in Michigan or Ohio or somewhere. It was a bit of a shock, but it was a nice change for me. From 10 people in a club, in a jazz club, to like 5,000 people or 20,000, depending on where it was.
In his short time as Bowie's manager, Tony DeFries had developed many theories about the rock music world. One was, if you're going to be a star, you should always act like one. Consequently, Mike Garson was amazed to find the band living like royalty.
To the utmost extreme, I'll just never forget, because now I live in Los Angeles. They put us up at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and we had bungalows. I remember being right here in this bungalow in the middle, and to the right of me was Elton John, and left was Perry Como. I mean, it was such a radical shift from the lifestyle that I lived, you know. The room service bill for just the band and the entourage, this is 1972, must have been 10 grand for the 10 days we were staying there. And we only were playing one concert in LA at the time. And that's not the hotel bill. That was just extras, people ordering champagne and beer and caviar and what have you. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was the first tour, and they went all out.
Drummer Woody Woodmansey.
It was marvellous. It was good. It was good fun. It was good because we toured as though we were millionaires. You know, it was on that level. The way DeFries actually arranged it, I mean, he was very good in those areas. He totally kept any problems, any trouble, any hassles off musicians' lives. And it was just like looking at a country and travelling through a country but not actually being in the country. As though you're going around the top of the hotels all over the country and coming down the hotel to do your gig and back up again. It was good.
Let me put my arms around your head. Gee, it's hot, let's go to bed. Don't forget to turn on the light. Don't laugh, babe, it'll be alright. Pour me out another phone. I'll ring and see if your friends are home. Perhaps the strange ones in the dome can lend us a book we can read up alone and try to get it on like once before. When people stared in Jacker's eyes and scored like the video films we saw. His name was always Buddy, and he'd shrug and ask to stay. She'd sigh like Twig the Wonder Kid and turn her face away. She's uncertain if she likes him, but she knows she really loves him. It's a crash course for the ravers. It's a driving Saturday. Young the foreman prayed at work. Neither hands nor limbs would burst. It's hard enough to keep formation amid this fallout saturation. Cursing at the astronet that stands in steel by his cabinet. He's crashing out with Sylvia, Euro supply for aging men. With snorting head he gazes to the shore. Once it raged, the sea that raged no more, like the video films he saw. His name was always Buddy, and drunk and asked to stay. And she'd sigh like Twig the Wonder Kid and turn her face away. She's uncertain if she likes him, but she knows she really loves him. It's a crash course for the ravers. It's a driving Saturday, yeah, yeah.
At the end of that first American tour, the band flew back to London, while Bowie returned by ship, having developed a serious aversion to flying. It was during the subsequent recording of Aladdin Sane that Mike Garson was able to gauge the full breadth of Bowie's talent.
He's like Miles Davis is in the jazz world. He knew how to pick his musicians to get the most out of them. And I would drive in the limo with him to some of the smaller towns we would travel. There was also another car or bus for the band, I don't remember, but he would take me with him and he would be asking questions about the jazz scene and avant-garde music and what this and what that. And that led to a lot of my playing on Aladdin Sane, which is avant-garde, from that conversation. Because when I put that track down, my first recording of it was blues and my second overdub was Latin. He said, no, play that avant-garde way, the way you tell me you were playing jazz in the 60s in New York was. And then, well, I'm just giving an example of his mind and brilliance and his ability. He was a real genius to pull the best out of a person.
Watching him dash away, swinging an old bouquet, dead roses, sake and strange divine. You'll make it. Passionate, bright young things, takes him away to war. Don't fake it, sagging glissando strings. sensational. Paris or maybe hell. I'm waiting, clutches of sad remains. Wait for Aladdin saying, you'll make it. We'll love Aladdin saying, millions weep fountain, just in case of sunrise. We'll love Aladdin saying, we'll love Aladdin saying, love Aladdin saying.
So the band was playing, and the first recording of my overdub on the piano, I played like David said, that's great, but that's not what I want. And I went again, he didn't say what to play, and I played a Latin one, and I went, and he said, not quite. And then he said, play that avant-garde thing we used to talk about in the car when driving to gigs. And then that's when I put all this crazy stuff like that over the chords and in rhythm, and that's the one they used. I mean, if I had my integrity fully together, I should have said, David, I look forward to seeing you in 10 or 20 years again. I'm out of here, back to the jazz scene, because I've just given it all. And now it would just be me being any good musician that you can get anywhere around the world. I didn't know that at the time.
The tour which Bowie undertook to promote Aladdin Sane provided the ultimate surprise. On the 3rd of July, 1973, at the peak of his popularity, he made a momentous announcement from the stage of the Hammersmith Odeon.
Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do. Time takes a cigarette, puts it in your mouth, pull on your finger, then another finger, then your cigarette. Well, the wall-to-wall is calling, it lingers, but still you forget. Oh, you're a rock and roll suicide. You're too young to lose it, but you're too old to lose it. And the clock waits so patiently on your song. Well, you walk past the cafe you can't eat when you've lived too long. You're a rock and roll suicide.
I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into, because I knew that it was the end of the Spiders. I knew that I really had done as much as I could in the context of that band. And I was so weary of touring that I really actually wondered whether I ever wanted to tour again. I didn't know, I wasn't experienced enough at that time to know that when you're at the end of a tour, you always feel like you will never tour again. And you always say it to yourself, I will never go through this again for all the money in the world. And you always do. But I didn't know that. That was the first time I got to a point of absolute fatigue, to a point that I just could hardly lift my head up. I was so tired of the hotels and the driving and all that. And I just said, we'll never tour again, you know. And I really meant it. About 48 hours later, I'm sitting there thinking, what have I said? I don't really think I meant that at all, because I'm feeling better already. But too late. I mean, I know I really pissed off Woody and Trevor. They were so angry, I think, because I hadn't really told them that I was splitting the band up. But that's what Ziggy did, so I had to do it too, you know. It was almost like I was following the pattern of what I'd written, because I was in that particular frame of mind that I was Ziggy, and it was like, this had to be done. I had to finish the band. Ziggy broke up the band. There you go. Tonight's the night. I split the band up. And Vince Taylor had done the same thing, you see. He just stopped and then they guided him away. I'd forgotten that bit. But it was a part of a pattern. I felt it was self-fulfilling prophecy, you know.
In my life I've never stopped to worry about a thing. Opened up and shouted out, never tried to see. Wondering if I've done wrong. Will this depression last for long? Won't you tell me, where have all the good times gone? Where have all the good times gone? Where have all the good times gone? Yesterday was such an easy game for you to play, but let's face it, things are so much easier today. Guess you need some bringing down. Get your feet back on the ground. Why don't you tell me, where have all the good times gone? Where have all the good times gone? Where have all the good times gone?
As a stopgap, to use time positively while he considered his next move, Bowie and the remnants of his band went to France to record Pin-Ups, a tribute to his favorite British groups of the 60s, including the Kinks, from whose catalog he picked that one, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? As Pin-Ups was climbing to number 1 to become his second chart-topping album in 6 months, Bowie moved into Olympic Studios to start work on his most ambitious project to date, Diamond Dogs, an adaptation of George Orwell's 1984.
It actually was a stone-cold version of 1984 as a musical. And it was, in fact, the first time I was rejected by a literary figure, because my office approached Mrs. Orwell, because I said, "Office, I want to do 1984 as a musical. Go and get me the rights." So they duly trooped off to see Mrs. Orwell, who in so many words said, "You've got to be out of your gourd. You think I'm turning this over to that as a musical?" So they came back and said, "Sorry, David, you can't write it." I said, "What do you mean? It's impossible. Of course I can write it." I said, "No, she won't let you, you see. She won't give you the rights. She won't sell you the rights for any amount of money in the world." She said she's seen one film of it, and that was such a disaster that she would never let it go out of her grasp ever again. So I really had to turn around on a dime, because I was already in the studio putting bits of it down. I thought, oh, no, right, I have to kind of, go somewhere else with this. Which was fairly easy, because I was working with a real freewheeling guy called Keith Harwood, who, much to my sort of, I was really kind of in awe of him, because he'd worked on like 3 Stones albums, so he was really professional rock and roll, and he's one of the first people that was like down and out rock and roll. He had the greasy hair and the boots and the leather jackets, and I'd been used to engineers like Ken Scott, kind of really, goes home to his wife at night and tie and shirt and all that. Very professional person. Sort of my George Martin in a way, And really the only kind of other guy who was off the wall was Tony Visconti, but he was a bit more hippie than anything else. Tony was sort of a laid back, hash kind of guy. But Keith was like heavyweight, cocaine and grease, and hey, rock and roll, but it was North London, so it's hey, rock and roll, and it was only really Keith and I in the studio, because I got this thing that my usual thing is that, well, I can play anything, I don't need a band. I'll play all the instruments. It's as easy as that. From violin, somebody give me a violin. Here you go. Touch of the Mark Bolans. But I did end up using proper drummers and bass players and things. But a lot of the overdub stuff, like the guitars and the saxophones and keyboards and all that, were me. had in my mind this kind of half Wild Boys 1984 world where there were these ragamuffins, but they're a bit more violent than ragamuffins. I guess they staggered through from Clockwork Orange somewhere as well. And they'd taken over this barren city, this city that was falling apart. Oh, they'd been able to break into windows of jewellers and things, so they dressed themselves up in furs and diamonds and all that, but they had snaggled teeth and they were really filthy. They were kind of like violent Oliver Twists. You know, it was a take on if those guys had gone malicious, you know, if it was like Fagin's gang that had gone absolutely apeshit and they were living on the tops of buildings. And I got that from my father's work at Dr. Barnardo's homes, because Dr. Barnardo and Lord Shaftesbury had once gone on the top of the roofs of the City of London and found all these urchins living up there. And that always stayed in my mind as being an extraordinary image of all these kids living up on the roofs of London, you know. And so I had the Diamond Dogs were living on the roofs of London, you know, and they were all little Johnny Rottens and Sid Viciouses, really. And there was no means of transport, so in my mind, they were all rolling around on these roller skates with huge wheels on. I don't know why, but had huge wheels, and they squeaked because they hadn't been oiled properly. So there's these gangs of squeaking, roller skating, vicious hoods, you know, with Bowie knives and like furs on. And they were all skinny because they had eaten enough, and they were funny coloured hair, and that, like, it was in a way a precursor to what sort of was a punk thing. You know, that's where it was going, and that's what I wanted to stage. That's what I decided. I decided that would be my rock musical, Diamond Dogs. Never came up to be a rock musical, but I got damn near it.
And in the death, as the last few corpses lay rotting on the slimy thoroughfare, the shutters lifted an inch in Temperance Building high on Poacher's Hill, and red, mutant eyes gazed down on Hunger City. No more big wheels. Fleas the size of rats sucked on rats the size of cats, and 10,000 peopleoids split into small tribes, coveting the highest of the sterile skyscrapers like packs of dogs assaulting the glass fronts of Lovney Avenue, ripping and reed-wrapping mink and shiny silver fox, now legworms, family badge of sapphire and cracked emerald. Any day now, be gear out for Diamond Dogs.
This ain't nothing, no! This is genocide!
To the American fans fortunate enough to see it, the summer 1974 tour, which accompanied the release of Diamond Dogs, was the most spectacular and theatrical ever mounted. Though Bowie's elaborate choreography relegated his newly assembled band to a subordinate role, where they were concealed within the scenery.
Oh, that was a riot. That was because I thought, well, if this is going to be, you know, a musical, you don't see bands in musicals, they sit in the pit. So I've got to get rid of my band, so I put them behind these... oh, dear. Oh, God, it was a scream, because I would have these flats on stage, you know, and the band, I'd had them all positioned behind these flats, and I'd be working through the show, and unbeknownst to me, during the show, they'd all edge out. And every time I turned around, they'd go back in again. So it was like, he's behind you! You know, it was sort of like this... It was like this... pantomime show. it ended up, they all came out on stage. They ended up on stage with me. But the first 2 or 3 shows, I really got them behind the screens, and it was like this kind of real stark one-man show. And we had Cherry Picker. It had a secretary's chair affixed to the top of it, and I'd start off doing Space Oddity, sitting in the chair on the telephone, and during the course of the song, the chair being on a cherry picker, the arm of the cherry picker would come out of the window, but it was lit in such a way that you didn't see the cherry picker arm, so that all you saw was this chair coming out over the audience, and I was right about 20 foot out over the audience, over their heads, singing, and of course the nights that it wouldn't go back in again, and I was bloody stuck out there. Oh, God, and I had to sing 3 or 4 songs until they got... So I'd be singing... I mean, that in itself was so totally dada, because I was sitting there singing 3 or 4 songs into a telephone. I mean, it was so ludicrous. And one night I actually had to climb back on the pole to get back into the window, because it just wouldn't come back in again. Never worked with props. And we had a bridge that used to go up and down, a bridge that went from one building to another, the full scan of the stage, asymmetrically going from one side to the other. And occasionally that would start plunging down at the speed of light, and I would sort of jump off it as I assumed it would hit the bottom, and I would be in the air so that I didn't come to some catastrophic end. It was quite unbelievable headache, that tour. But it was spectacular. It was a fantastic... I think it was truly the first real rock and roll theatrical show that made any sense. A lot of people, I think, feel it has never been bettered. I mean, it was such an extravaganza. And it was so weird. It just came from such a strange place. It really looked like one of those expressionist movies come to life. It was like Metropolis meets Caligari, but on stage in colour, and it had a rock and roll soundtrack to it. I mean, it was something else. It really was.
Someday they won't let you, now you must agree. Times they are a-telling, changing is a breed. You've read it in the papers, tracks are on TV. Beware the Southeast Shore of 1984. Your pretty cranium and fill it full of air. Tell you that you're 80, lover you won't care. They'll be shooting up on anything, tomorrow's never there. Beware the Southeast Shore of 1984. Come see, remember me. We played out an all-night movie road. You said it would last, but I guess we
Playing bass on the Diamond Dogs tour was Herbie Flowers.
The set was incredible. I mean, there was this gigantic hand that used to open and a big mirrored wardrobe. That's what we used to call it, the wardrobe. I mean, marvellous stuff that today, if you look back, might seem all a bit scaffoldy, but it was before the miniaturised this, that and the other and lasers, and it was actually probably stretching that kind of technology to the limit. I'm sure nobody made any money out of it just because of the huge size of it, but it brought the world's attention to what David is very, very, very quickly. I mean, all the people that were involved in the Main Man organisation had all been lifted out of 1 or 2 shows that had been running or collapsed, and there were these remarkable young, virile imaginations all there, all for the one reason of putting a damn good show on, and it was. I mean, to this day I look back at the artwork and everything else and think it's as near as rock music can get to being a film.
Now, Billy rapped all night about a suicide pact. Kick it in the head when he was 25. Oh, that speed jive. Don't want to stay alive when you're 25. Looses stealing clothes from undercars. Freddie Scott sits picking up the stars from his face. Funky little boat race. Oh, the television man is crazy, singing with too loud and think what bands. Oh man, I need TV when I've got T-Rex running the gas out of tune. All the young dudes carry the news.
From David Live, Bowie's version of All the Young Dudes, which he had originally written in a successful attempt to resuscitate Mott the Hoople's career. After a short break, the Diamond Dogs tour was scheduled to recross America by a different route, but Bowie already had other ideas.
We're supposed to go through America twice, 2 ways, and I took it one way and it was okay, but by the end I'd become soul man. And I've been writing this stuff for young Americans, and I thought, I'm fed up with this set now. I want to do this soul show. So I didn't tell my management, I just struck the set and I got another set built. And they put the Diamond Dogs show back through America and got like massive sellouts everywhere. And I took another show back with different songs and it was just a white flat at the back and a little proscenium stage with little stands for the musicians to stand at. That was it. There was no show. Absolutely none. Just backing singers and a horn player, David Sanborn, that, had been brought to my attention. Brilliant sax player. And we died a death everywhere we went because what's he doing? He's wearing a Puerto Rican peg pant suit and he's singing all this soul stuff. Where's Halloween Jack and all that? Like, all right, look. You've taken Ziggy away and now, you're giving us Halloween Jack and now that's gone and we haven't even seen the show yet. It was like real self-destruction, but I loved it. I had a great time because I had Luther Vandross was part of the backing vocals and Carlos Alomar was a hell of a band. Mike Garson on piano. It was just wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. Powerful music. Eventually, of course, when the album came out, it was very well received and it became, the Young Americans became a very big album for me. But, I really sort of advanced myself. I sort of was tumbling over myself with ideas.
One of the linchpins of Young Americans, and indeed many subsequent albums, was Carlos Alomar. They'd first met when he played on a session Bowie was producing in New York.
The artist was Lulu, who I grew up with, To Serve With Love and the whole thing. And this girl was about the most soulful English girl that I've ever heard. I mean, the girl can really sing. So I really wanted to work with her for that. And then, Bowie was there. He was very, very white and very, very thin and very, very red-headed. And I told him he looked like shit, really is what I said, because he looked so thin. He was pasty white. I mean, it was right after Spiders from Mars and all that, I was like, you need some home cooking and you need to get off the road for a while. So if you want, come over to my house, we'll get some chicken going and some rice and beans and we'll see what we can do about those bones. And, surprisingly enough, I was living in Queens and he took a limousine and he was there the next day. And we talked and hung out all night long and had a great old time, So he started doing the Diamond Dogs tour. And in the middle of the Diamond Dogs tour, he decided to take a break and do an album, which was kind of cute. When you're in the middle of the tour, you got 2 months off, you run into the studio. During the interim, I had hung out with him and we had gone to places, we had gone to the Apollo Theater. He wanted to go to the Apollo, to the Latin places, to all the hangouts in, Manhattan. So with that purpose in mind, we hung out a lot and that was really nice bonding kind of thing when we first started. Took him to the Apollo Theater and he met the main ingredient and I think Richard Pryor, who was one of the comedians on the show, and kind of hung out, And when he came back, he said, I really want to do this. He was listening to TSOP, The Sound of Philly at that time, which was very much into that heavily percussive kind of Afro rhythm thing happening at the time. So he definitely wanted to do something like that. So we went into the studio and we did the album in Philadelphia.
We pulled in just behind the bridge. He lays her down. He frowns. Gee, my life's a funny thing. Am I still too young? He kissed her then and there. She took his ring, took his babies. It took him minutes, took her nowhere. Heaven knows he'd have taken anything. All night. She wants a young American. Young American, young American. She wants the young American. All night. But she wants the young American. Standing right through the picture window, she finds a slinky vagabond. He coughs as he passes a Ford Mustang. Heaven forbid she's taking anything but the freak and his title for nothing. This is a step and cuts his hand, showing nothing. It swoops like a song. She cries, where have all Papa's heroes gone? All night. She wants a young American. Young American, young American. She wants the young American. All right. Well, she wants the young American. All the way from Washington. Her breadwinner begs off the bathroom floor. We live for just these 20 years. Do we have to die for the 50 more? All right. He wants the young American. Young American. Yes, he does. He wants the young American. All right. All right. Well, he wants the young American.
The title track from Young Americans, recorded at Sigma, the source of the sound of Philadelphia, which exerted such an influence on American pop during the mid-'70s. Paradoxically, when he came to record his album there, Bowie passed on the house engineer in favor of his old mate, Tony Visconti, now back on the team after a separation of nearly 4 years.
Here David is hiring the Soul studio, and he gets me, a British engineer, to come and get the sound. I thought it was silly, personally. But, this is another one of those times where David said, you can do it, Tony. You're going to do the engineering. And this was a real homemade console. It was Sigma Sound Studios in Philadelphia, where a lot of great R&B and soul records were being made at the time. And I was amazed to find how low-tech it was. The desk was an old API desk, and it was probably built to handle 4-track and 8-track, and here it was one of those, something typical you'd find in those days when we were making the transition very quickly from 8-track to 16-track. People weren't getting in new consoles. They were just getting out their electric drill and just drilling more holes in the consoles and adding more things to it. And a lot of these things, these switches and knobs, didn't have any names on them, like you'll find nowadays. Everything is carefully labeled. So I said, what is this? I said, I can't work this console. He says, well, I'll show you how it's done. So I had to have this very talented Grammy-winning house engineer sit next to me through the whole time, because every time I had to change something on the board, I didn't know where to plug it in, or because only he knew. I think he was responsible for most of the new holes in the desk, So as usual, a David Bowie album starts in chaos and ends in chaos, and chaos in the middle, but somehow something amazing comes out.
There was no point in doing a straightforward take on American soul music, because that's, it had been done already. So I just wanted to put this spin on it. And even the tunes themselves weren't, you couldn't really envisage an American soul artist doing any of those songs, but they paid homage to the soul sound, things like Somebody Up There Likes Me, the format of it isn't straight rhythm and blues at all by any means. Things like Win, the chord structures are much more of a European thing than an American thing. But it imbued the muscular qualities of soul music pretty accurately. And I got these pretty heavyweight American musicians working on it that gave it some sound of a kind of a fake authenticity to it. It really was a plastic soul album.
That I'm crazy. I feel you driving and you're only the wheel. Slow down, let someone love you. I've never I start to feel if there's nothing to hide me, and you've never seen me hanging naked and wide. Somebody lied, but I say it's hip to be alive. Now your smile is spreading thin. Seems you're trying not to lose. Since I'm not supposed to grin, all you've got to do is win.
Having engineered, arranged, conducted, and produced the tracks for Young Americans, Tony Visconti returned to his London studio to mix them.
David was, by now, living a real high life. I mean, he was out every night, different women every night. I mean, having the time of his life. He couldn't be bothered, quite honestly, in the mixing of the album. He just gave me instructions. I have a telex, which is about 20 pages long, about what he wanted me to do on it. Basically, it was to listen to the latest Jackson 5 album and get the rhythm section sounding like that. And on Young Americans, could you put a little bit of slap echo on the conga drum in the middle break and things like that. So it's a lovely souvenir from that album. And when I sent the mixes back to New York, he totally approved, but by that time, he had met John Lennon.
I met John firstly at some Elizabeth Taylor party. Elizabeth was a charming woman, and she got really kind of involved in coming down to Young Americans, to the sessions and all that. And I rather feel it's because she was probably trying to sell me on this idea of this film that she had called Bluebird, which she went to Russia and was trying to talk me into. And I really liked her. She was lovely, but the film was awful. The script was dreadful, and I didn't, it's like really a difficult, rather embarrassing situation because, I really sort of didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I went to, I'm sure I didn't, I'm sure she's much more grown up than that, but she invited me to some party, and she was there with, I think John Lennon turned up, because he wanted to meet her too, he liked meeting new people, and we got together, and we got on very well, and we'd always sort of, when I was in New York, I'd always knock around with him, and he came along to the studio, and we started working on. Carlos had a riff that he'd had in his head for some time, which I put to a standard called Foot Stomping by the Flares. Everybody young and old. But we used what became the Fame riff. That was our take. We sort of changed it a bit and had that Fame. And then, of course, I did the inevitable. When John came to the studio, I said, let's write something. I'm taking this chance by the horns, I thought, I'm not letting go of this. And he said, yeah, great, let's do something. So, well, what should we do? And then Carlos said, how about that riff that we did with Foot Stomping? So we played that, and we just started, chugging along with that and making up stuff as we were. And John just started singing, I'm.
Carlos Alomar.
We were listening back to the song when it was done, and we kept hearing, when that part came in, and Dave was like, what is that? So we isolated the tracks, and we finally brought up Lennon's tracks for his acoustic guitar. And there, every time that part would come, since his chin was kind of like resting on his guitar, you'd hear this, and David said, he's saying Fame. So I think that had a lot to do with the original, what are we going to call this song, and what are we going to write about?
Fame makes a man take things over. Fame lets him loose, hard to swallow. Tomorrow
he writes them in the studio. He goes in about 4 words and a few guys and starts laying down this stuff. And he has virtually nothing. He's making it up in the studio. So I just contributed whatever I contributed, like backwards piano and a couple of things like repeat of Fame. I must say I admire him for the vast repertoire of talent the guy has, I was never around when the Ziggy Stardust thing came because I'd already left England when all that was going on, so I didn't really know what he was. And meeting him doesn't give you much more of a clue, because you don't know which one you're talking to. And, we all have our little personality traits, so between him and me, I don't know what was going down, but we seemed to have some kind of communication together, and I think he's great.
Is it any wonder I reject you first? Fame, fame, fame. Is it any wonder you're too cool to fool? Fame. Bullet for you, shooting for me. Gotta get a ranger gun. Fame. What's the name? What's the name? What's the name? What's the
The 2 Young Americans tracks Bowie recorded with John Lennon, Across the Universe and Fame, replaced 2 of the Philadelphia cuts, much to Tony Visconti's displeasure. But released as a single in June 1975, Fame gave Bowie his first American #1. Carlos Alomar.
When we first started doing Young Americans, the hours were amazing. We had never gone and done any hours like this, where you get called to do a session and you have to just wait around till 2 in the morning when it's your turn to do something, We were doing marathon sessions. The reason that we had those long, weird hours was because of his cocaine situation, which was foreign to us, because you got to remember, we were young kids that were based in the Apollo Theater. If we were ever going to do anything with drugs, we would have done it then. But we were all clean cut, so we didn't really do anything. But because we were in the music business, we were aware of it, because it's all around you, even if you don't use any drugs. But the fact that he was doing cocaine at the time did influence the fact that, he would go through a creative period and then, boom, go to sleep for 4 days, and who can think?
Having worked and played himself almost to a standstill, Bowie could well have taken the summer off to rest. Instead, he rolled up to the set of The Man Who Fell to Earth to make his debut as a headlining film star under the direction of Nick Rogue.
When I worked on Man Who Fell to Earth, I had about 300 books with me that I took in these bookcases, specially made for the road. And I was sort of very proudly showing off all my first editions of strange books that I'd amassed to Nick. At the end of the evening, he said, "David, your problem is you just don't read enough." It's never so put down in my life. I think what he meant was I was talking about the books much more than reading them. I think he was probably right.
The BBC TV documentary Cracked Actor, filmed during the Diamond Dogs tour, revealed Bowie as a perilously thin and rather distanced character floating through the American landscape. To Nick Rogue, his demeanor seemed perfect for the role of Thomas Newton, an alien who visits Earth. But the director couldn't help but notice that his star was more than a little whacked out.
Well, at the time, there were a lot of people who were whacked out, weren't there? A bit of a whacked out time, or they're coming to an end of a whacked out time. And it hadn't affected him, in terms of his work, not for the public, or not for me. I didn't see that, and you can't temper your judgment by saying, "Oh, I don't care for what he does," if it isn't affecting the work. I don't think that there was ever an issue, at all. I became semi-obsessed with that he would be in it, the more I thought of him, the more I thought I can't think of anyone else. When that's a wonderful thing when you're casting or when you're thinking of. Someone said to me, I remember when we were shooting with David, but can he act? I said, there isn't an actor that's held 60,000 people on their own in the Hollywood, but apart from their performance, the performance is so extraordinary, and that have people turn up at the next concert like him in the previous one, and then he's changed his image. It's a continuing experiment, if you like, and that is a very attractive thing as far as the acting side, and I think David's shown that tremendously in a lot of his work.
According to Bowie, his first major screen role required no Oscar-winning dexterity to portray the character Rogue had in mind.
No, he just said, be yourself. Nick, I think Nick realised that I had some serious problems at the time and just thought, he's perfect. Just put him in, just change his clothes, just put him in as he is, let him just walk through it, and I did. I was just out of my skull on that movie. But I was a good boy, I turned up on time and I did, everything I was supposed to do. But it really was Nick's film. I don't think I really had any kind of say in how I was going to do anything in that movie. He said, right, now look left, and I looked left, and that was it.
Of course, Bowie's recollection contains only some elements of the truth.
The truth, what is that, said jesting pilot. Well, I don't like giving acting reasons. I do like giving reasons for behavior, what I think the character. And so I think he's being rather diffident about and shy about that, saying he didn't bring something of himself because it certainly, and he said that to me afterwards, it stayed with him a long time afterwards. The film stayed with him a long time. I think the experience of the film stayed with him a long time afterwards. And I went to a concert of his shortly after the film. He still had the red hair from the movie, and he was staying Mr. Newton for a long time.
Golden years go, golden years go, golden years go. Don't let me hear you say life's taking you nowhere. Look at that sky, life's begun. Nights are warm and the days are young.